Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Just Get a Real Job with your host, me, Jamie McKinley. It is an absolute joy to be able to welcome on the podcast Margaret McDonald, who is a Carnegie Medal winner and also the author of a brilliant book called Glasgow Boys, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading last year. Margaret, thank you very much for coming on Just Get a Real Job. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Jamie. That's so kind. Yeah, so keen to chat.
I've got Glasgow Boys next to me here. I read this book
Yeah.
last summer, so it's been really fun the last few days, like reminding myself all about Glasgow Boys and sort of going back into that world again. But for the listeners as well, do you want to sort of first maybe introduce yourself? Because I know you're working on other books as well, and you've had a really incredible couple of years.
Yeah, well, thank you. I know it was a really incredible year last year. So for those that don't know, Glasgow Boys is a young adult novel about two boys, Banjo and Finlay, who met in the care system in Glasgow. But when we meet them as the reader, they haven't spoken for 3 years. So Banjo is starting a new foster placement in a new school, new town in East Kilbride, which is where I grew up. And Finlay is starting his first year at Glasgow Uni to do his nursing degree. And again, they're both in these huge periods of transition and change and uncertainty in their life, but it's really reminding them of one another and what happened. So the novel sort of charts the course of their journey back to one another, throughout the kind of people that they meet and the experiences that they have. And yes, as you mentioned, it did win the Carnegie last year, which was just an absolute surreal experience. I obviously, as a children's author, those that write in the children's space know of the Carnegie. It's a incredibly prestigious children's award across the UK. And I'd always I'm quite aspirational, so I'd always kind of imagined that it might be something that I'd win in like 10 years or so, once I'd kind of made a name for myself, hopefully. I just never expected for Glasgow Boys to kind of connect with people the way that they did. It's just been such a source of real continued joy that it's found its readers.
Yeah, so it's. I think what I love most about Glasgow Boys is it's a love story about platonic love, which we don't get enough on screen at all. Because often it's all about relationships. I'm saying on screen because I'm so used to talking about TV, but we don't get enough in book form either, or just in general. I think it's the way that we tell stories a lot in the UK and in Scotland. So I love how much of a love story it is platonically, but also that it is so Scottish, but yet it's travelled across the rest of the world in the UK and stuff. I was so excited last year when one of my friends in London was like, I'm reading a book called Glasgow Boys. I was like, oh my God, that's great that this is like travelled further afield. So no, it's great in all those reasons as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I said, the reception was just not something that me or my team at Faber, who like are all kind of English London centric people, it wasn't even something that they anticipated. Faber, my publishing house, are quite an independent, quite a small publishing house, in the sort of publishing landscape. If people don't know, but there are, maybe 5 big publishers: Penguin, Macmillan, Simon and Schuster, HarperCollins, Hachette. And if you're not with one of those, you would be considered with an independent publisher. So that would be Faber, or Fourth Estate. There's so many incredible indie publishers that do so much incredible work and really are pushing the boundaries of what gets published, I feel, but often in that way that they can't push it to like a mass appeal wide audience. So when Glasgow Boys was picked up, obviously I was so delighted to work with Faber, and they were my absolute dream team to work with. But we always had very small kind of expectations. We just didn't imagine that it would ever kind of blow up the way that it did.
Well, I'm really excited this afternoon to sort of chat to you, Margaret, not just about Glasgow Boys as a book, but also about the sort of process of firstly finding an agent to get a book published, like how the sort of editing process of all that works. And this podcast is all about sort of demystifying creative careers, and obviously like being an author, a lot of people grow up and go, how the hell do you actually make that happen and stuff? And I'm really excited because I know that you've talked about before that you had like 65 rejections before like this book got considered by an agent and things, and like obviously it went through so many redrafts and there's so many steps to sort of get there. How did you sort of keep going with so many rejections? Like that's also can be quite hard, especially if you sort of come from a working class background like yourself, where you sort of there's always that little bit of self doubt ingrained within us, I feel.
So true. No, it's such an excellent question, and I feel like I said that figure because I do have literally in my emails, I created a folder for rejections, and I do have 60, straight up rejections. But in terms of the actual amount, it would be in the hundreds, because a lot of the time you just don't get a reply. I'm sure that so many of us are familiar with just the like cold rejection, no response. You wait 6 months and think, okay, I'm not going to wait any longer. And that's so common, I feel, as you said, across the industry as well. And yeah, breaking into the arts, and breaking into traditional publishing, as someone who grew up very working class, I always knew that it would take a lot of perseverance. And one of the things for me that massively kept me persevering was the fact that the rejections were telling me something about Glasgow Boys. I tried to find a kind of usefulness to the rejection, and if it was, straight up not for me, I feel like, I would rework my pitch. So in order to get an agent, which is probably the hardest hurdle in getting published, you have to submit them a query package. So that would be your first 3 chapters of your novel, a full entire synopsis. If you can make it a page, that is preferred. So you really have to condense your whole entire book and the events that happens into one page, and then a little pitch just about yourself, who you are, and what the book is, and what the kind of market would be for it. So yeah, as I said, every time I would get a rejection, I would rework a little bit of it. I would think, okay, something's not working. And then the personal rejections, which might be, I'm not really connecting to the voice, I'd think that's fine, because, the voice in Glasgow Boys is a really kind of strong element of it. So it's not something that I wanted to change. So it's kind of, I think something that really helps me persevere with rejection is that if you speak to someone and you have like a favourite book or a favourite movie and they say, didn't like it, you would feel so passionate, like you would defend it, you would, kind of maintain your opinion. So I feel as though when we're kind of criticised or critiqued on our own work, like we don't, apply that same logic. So for me, I try to apply the same logic that, well, do I still like it? Do I still really believe in it? And it's honestly what kept me going, as very like cheesy as that sounds.
But I think you sometimes need to have that own sort of belief in your project and stuff. And I love
Yeah.
that you had the sort of rejections folder. I love that I've interviewed somebody in the past and they were talking about that 100 rejections thing, which I always think about now. Like, where if you just sort of go out your way to not deliberately be rejected as such, but like accepting, like, well, I might get 100, but I'll probably get one yes. And as you say, you only need that sort of one yes, and it can unlock so many doors.
Yeah, it's the number one thing I say when I go into schools and I talk to the kids, and also when I do lit festivals and any event and I talk to any kind of aspiring author, and they say, how do you persevere? Like even before I tried to get Glasgow Boys published, I had a Word document of my literary kind of submissions. So I would submit to like lit mags, and every single story that I had, I would try to submit at least 10 times before I moved on to another one. So I do think like having kind of a clear goalpost, and as you said, knowing that rejection is genuinely just part of the process. It is not something that you can duck and dive. You just have to so get used to it. But I don't love the idea that people should have a tough skin, because I do feel that criticism should have some kind of use or purpose. I don't think that we should just accept, out and out, I guess, negativity. I think that it's useful to have a thick skin and expect rejection. But I do think that, you're allowed to care about your work. And if you need to like take time away, take a week off, like take a tea break, I also feel like that's just as important as getting used to rejections.
Yeah, 100%. I've talked a lot on this podcast in the past about how often in creative jobs, particularly and with creative projects, our identity is intertwined in it, and it's so hard when somebody's almost rejecting your work, 'cause it feels like they're rejecting you as a person as well, and it's really hard to separate them. So I think that's a really good point to make, that it's not just about accepting necessarily, like you should continually be pummeled by like no's and stuff as well. Sometimes you need to have that, be able to sort of go away and have a cup of tea and go, right, this isn't about me, this is about the work. And that's where good editors and good script editors or whoever it might be come in, for making sure that their criticism or their rejection is kind of constructive as well. It's not just going, we don't like this. It's, trying
So
to be
true.
like, this is the reason it's not for us and stuff, which is really obviously important as well.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of experience with different readers of all different kind of expertise levels, be it like tutors at university or even your school teachers, your friends and family. It takes a lot of experience in learning, I guess, when someone is a good editor or like knowing what is useful to you as an author. If someone literally doesn't connect to your work at all, then that is literally not your fault. You know what I mean? You've written something that is for someone, it can't be for everyone. It's for a specific, audience. Say for me, I write for YA, that's children's kind of teenagers. I write about coming of age and, coming up in the world and all those sorts of things. If a reader doesn't want to read that, they're not going to like my work regardless of like how I've written it or anything like that. I think you do have to know that there's an audience for you. So yeah, I feel like that's been really useful for me as well.
Yeah, I think the other part is that things are kind of subjective to an extent as well. I always remind myself that I'm a script editor in sort of TV space, and whenever I'm giving notes on something, I always sort of remind myself like, remember that to separate your sort of own taste from it as well, because somebody could read a script and go, "This is the best thing I've ever read," and somebody might go, and this isn't for me. So there's that aspect as well. I want to go back to sort of your earlier years as well before we get more into the Glasgow Boys and the sort of process there. You talked about being from East Kilbride, which is quite funny because I'm from Glenrothes and they're both new towns and they look really similar, even though they're completely different sides of the country from each other. But were you always writing when you were younger? Because I was reading some of that you'd written like 15 books or something, and you decided Glasgow Boys was the best one to pitch.
Yeah, for sure. So I do say that, but a lot of those are fan fictions. If anyone doesn't know what fan fiction is, it's just fiction based off an existing source material. And there is a website called Archive of Our Own where you can post your fan fiction. So when I was about 13, 14, I started reading fan fiction and posting and kind of finding readers that way. And I poured a lot of energy and time into these works. I think I've written an accumulated 600,000 words of fan fiction. A lot of words. I can't even think how many books that would be. Like, yeah, roughly 10 at least. So, Glasgow Boys was one of my kind of first original novels. I'd say maybe I've written 3 or 4. I mean, now I've written, 5 or 6 probably. But at the time, that I was publishing Glasgow Boys, I had written, 3 or 4 of my own, and the rest were fan fiction. But as I say, when I go into schools and all that sort of stuff and talk about writing, like fan fiction was one of the first things that got me into writing, because it can literally be anything. You can write a 100,000 word saga set in space, or you can write, a coffee shop story that's 10,000 words. There's no limits. I think that kind of freedom is so opposite to traditional publishing, which, has a certain age range and genre, like very specific. I think fan fiction, there's just so many ways that you can imagine, I guess, your favorite characters. So I often say it's like writing with the training wheels on, because you have the characters, you have the world, and you can just kind of get to play with it. So that is one of the major things that got me into writing. And I really, really don't think that I would be a writer if I hadn't found fan fiction. As I said, like coming from East Kilbride, like very kind of small town just outside of Glasgow, and there were no like writing groups. I mean, my school started a school magazine in my final year of high school, and I would have loved to have had a school magazine, throughout my entire time at high school, because as I said, I started writing fan fiction basically as soon as I hit high school, and I was kind of like the editor, like journalist. I like posted a few like creative short stories and stuff, but that was my only experience of having like a community of readers and a community of other writers. And I think that, like that alongside fan fiction, which was like an online community, really did push me and encourage me towards writing.
It's so interesting that sort of is the idea of doing the fan fiction stuff you're talking about as well, because it's all like people often talk about when you're a writer, you need to get your stripes and just keep writing and practicing. So it's like that, because you're talking about how freeing that was, it almost sounds like that allowed you to sort of get better as a writer with the pressure sort of of not having to, in the traditional publishing world, like having to, I don't know, sit and try and stick to a specific narrative or genre or something. So it sounds like that really allowed you to sort of explore your writing style and voice and stuff before eventually sitting down to do like Glasgow Boys or your other more like original books and things?
Yeah, no, 100% did. I feel that um you can make as many mistakes as you want, and you can get so much feedback, which I think is so integral, and it's so difficult to find just impartial people that don't know you. You know, you're only really going to get feedback from your school teachers who are maybe grading your work, or your like kind of close loved ones, friends and family. In order to find readers, I would say that, yeah, online, kind of posting online was one of the major ways that I managed to find readers. And yeah, I just honestly, I would not that I would recommend, because I think that like there's so many amazing like communities and forums in different ways. Like I remember NaNoWriMo, this was National Novel Writing Month. I think it's now finished, but every like year in the month of November, people would kind of collect together to try and write a full novel. And your goal was essentially 50,000 words, but people could write obviously over that, or sometimes people would kind of start with the 50,000 and try and add to it. And this was like a massive kind of event. People would post YouTube vlogs of them doing it, and you know, people would post like writing sprints, like live streams where you could like all write together. Yeah, just that communal element of it was so important for me as someone who like was doing it by myself, and I had no way of getting that kind of feedback.
Have you like did any of your sort of audience you'd cultivated from doing the fan fiction stuff? Has any of them ever got in touch with you and been like, "I loved Glasgow Boys," and had like sort of followed your career into being like a
Well,
proper publisher?
actually, no, because I was anonymous when I was
Oh,
writing my fan
interesting.
fiction. And then, yeah, when, I mean, obviously, as you're saying, like, it gives you so much freedom, but I do think in some ways, like, you outgrow it. I think if, you know, you're writing and you think, I have so many original ideas, and obviously Banjo and Finley came from me and my own experiences of sort of just growing up working class, working in the NHS, being like a first gen uni student, all these different things, they came so deeply from me. They weren't really connected to any fan fiction, so I knew I wanted to write, you know, my own novel. And I always, as I was writing fan fiction, was gearing up to the idea of writing my own novel. So I think in some ways you outgrow it, and then I knew I wanted to keep them separate, just because, you know, as someone who'd been writing it since I was 13, I didn't want to delete it, but I'm also very embarrassed of it because I do think it is terrible now. But I also feel like maybe some authors who publish traditionally then will like delete their fan works or delete their account. And as someone, as a reader who'd literally experienced like returning to a fan work or a fan author and finding it deleted, I knew I didn't want to give that experience to anyone. So I thought I'll leave it, like I'll keep it up as a kind of, you know, archival memory of myself. But I don't want to ever delete it, but I don't think I want to connect it to myself as an actual author.
It's so interesting. The way I can sort of relate to you on that is like I've been doing this podcast for 5.5 years. I think I was 24 when I started doing this, and I'm 30 now, so it's kind of mad. And it's so funny. Like if I ever listen to really early episodes, they're still out. They still exist. People can go and listen to them if they want. But you evolve
Yeah.
and change as a person and grow as well. So like it's kind of weird having this little archive that exists of like a younger version of yourself that you maybe listen to, or in your case like read and kind of cringe a bit. But I kind of think it's quite nice to sort of be able to sort of look back in your, I don't know, older version of yourself in a way and see like the sort of progress and things.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Jamie. And it's honestly the reason why I have kept it up is that it really is just for the nostalgia of it all. Like, as I said, I poured so much love and energy into it. And now I think how much I've changed, how much my voice is different now, how, you know, how different I am as a writer, but it does give me like a lot of nostalgia and a weird sense of fondness. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's always quite strange. If it ever pops up, I'm like, oh my god. If I see people have been listening to those episodes, I'm like, oh, who's listened to that? That's bizarre. Back to Glasgow Boys though and stuff. I'd love to sort of talk to you about where the sort of original idea and inspiration all came from. I know you had quite a hard time in lockdown. You were sort of having to shield and things as well, and a lot of like Banjo and Finley sort of came out of that period as well. But has this idea been with you for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed and grown and adapted quite a lot. And then in lockdown, I felt I had the kind of freedom and the ability to just really pour it out. I mean, I put so much, as I said, time and energy into it because there wasn't anything else I could really do. I mean, I was shielding during the pandemic. I was high risk, and I mean, I was only really allowed outside into my back garden. I wasn't really even allowed to like go a walk. And it was a horrible time for everyone, of course, obviously. But I do think, yeah, the shielding community or people who experience shielding really understand that kind of isolation. I was living with my parents, but they were key workers. So it was 2 meters apart at all times, even within my household. So yeah, like a horrible time, to be honest, but it definitely did give me the energy to channel into Glasgow Boys. And as somebody who, at the time I was writing Glasgow Boys, I think I was 22 or 23, because I'm 28 now, so long ago, 2020. But at the time I was writing it, like I had just finished my undergrad and I was doing my master's degree. And I think that I was really ruminating on the experiences that I'd had as yeah, a kind of working class first gen uni student. And then when lockdown lifted, I was able to kind of work as a vaccine assistant for the NHS. And then I also worked as an admin officer. And those experiences of kind of working alongside nurses and, you know, kind of listening to their experience of the pandemic, it really motivated me to put them on the page. And I felt so inspired to kind of write a story about a student nurse. Especially, you know, in 2017, I had a bowel operation. I was in hospital for about a month. And yeah, obviously you see your consultant once a week, you see the nurses multiple times a day, you get so close to them. So I really wanted to reflect that experience of nursing specifically in Scotland and, you know, a kind of student experience as well. And then with Banjo, I felt like I just kind of poured all of my trauma into him, bless. But something that Banjo experiences is called pain medication dependency. That's also something I experienced you know, pre-pandemic and before my bowel op. And I think it's also something that's not really talked about a lot. And since having published Glasgow Boys, had a lot of people, you know, talk to me about this experience and all the myriad, you know, kind of insights into substance issues. You know, I think there is often quite a clear like addiction or not, whereas like there's such a kind of myriad of experiences within that line, that spectrum, that people can have. So with dependency, it's not addiction, but you do experience withdrawal when you don't take whatever you are dependent on. I mean, honestly, I feel like people would probably relate to the experience of like not having a coffee in a day. You'll get a sore head. Like it's really similar, but it's just a little bit more severe. And then yeah, I mean, I also wanted to put Glasgow Boys in a very kind of Scottish context. I really wanted to explore my upbringing from East Kilbride, but from someone, you know, like Banjo, who was completely outside of it and had really no kind of understanding of East Kilbride. And then, yeah, having gone to kind of Glasgow Uni, I really wanted to reflect that on the page. So I feel like so much of it came from me and my experiences and just feeling like it was so cathartic to kind of write them. And I think I've said before in interviews, I really wanted to write about two people who, you know, would have absolutely no reason to know one another, completely chalk and cheese, and be forced into this kind of close proximity situation. And I felt like, you know, the care system was such an excellent kind of vehicle to explore that relationship and that dynamic. I've said before, but my partner also works in care, and he works for Action for Children, which is a charity that helps kids in and out of care. So he was such a brilliant insight to get. But we also hired a sensitivity reader. His name is John Rideau. He is a children's therapist who grew up in care. So we had such, you know, an amazing kind of reader insight into the experience of care because I really wanted it to be authentic. But I also felt like it was just such a great way to get these two characters together.
You've on it the way that the book sort of captures so many different aspects of modern Scotland is really lovely actually. And we talk like when I used to work in TV development, we talk all the time about like, you know, how quite a lot of the time Scottish set things are always quite depressing, or it's either quite gritty or quite like this is like the Highlands of Scotland. And what I love so much about Glasgow Boys is it's really quite a hopeful book, despite like quite this sort of serious setting. Like it's got a lot of like lovely funny moments in it, and it's all like ultimately a really like quite despite the subject matter, very, very hopeful. And it's lovely the way you've sort of captured all those things. And it's really nice that you're talking about the sort of authenticity really you brought in as well. Because I was going to ask you about that, so you sort of preempted one of my questions. But like, it's very obvious reading it that just the amount of care that sort of went into it, and it's really nice you've been able to sort of capture so many moments of your own life in the book and stuff. And I think that's why the voice of the book for me is like so strong when you read it. It just feels so like, I don't know, real in like a lovely way. Like the characters are so well realised. So I mean, it's
Thank
nice
you.
when
That's
you
so kind.
read a book and you're like, oh, I don't actually have a favourite character, because you kind of like Banjo and Finlay in different ways, and they're not actually together a lot in the book as well, without giving too much away. Like you sort of the whole
Yeah,
book, you're just like, I want them to reunite again, which is also
yeah.
like a really nice, way of capturing a sort of the love story aspect of it as well. Like,
Yeah, thank you so much. And honestly, talking about subjectivity, that has been such a source of people's kind of negative and positive reviews. People love that element or people hate it. And I think, it's been really useful for me as an author to know that. I think to experience, this is my first published work, and despite obviously having received kind of impartial feedback from fanfiction, I've never experienced the likes of kind of public reviews that I have on Glasgow Boys, and the amount of opinions that I've had on Glasgow Boys and the readers. And honestly, I get, messages almost every day at this point from readers, and that is such a privilege and an honour. But I also feel it's been so useful for me as an author, even as I'm writing, kind of my next works, to know that there are things that people will both love and hate simultaneously. And it really is just about your kind of decision and your intention as an author, about, okay, if people are going to love it or hate it, like, where do I kind of lie?
yeah, it's always an interesting one, especially bringing in like sensitivity readers. And I've like outside advisors and stuff. I was an assistant script editor on the second series of Screw, which are Channel 4 drama about prison and stuff. And one of my favourite things about that job was, like, Rob Williams is an amazing writer. He's just done The Witness on Netflix, which has just come out. And it takes a lot of care in his work as well. And we got to work with some amazing like advisors, because we had a whole episode about a prisoner that had come through the care system as well, and worked with like people to sort of get their lived experience into the script and things. And it is interesting. Some people have really negative reaction to that, but I think it's a really nice way of doing things, and I think it's lovely that sort of become the standard now in the way we make a lot of media and books and things.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's so necessary, especially if the community that you are representing is in any way marginalised, because, of course, this is fiction, not everything is an autobiography, and I totally respect that argument. But I would also say, these are real people, they are not fictional. We're not writing about dragons. And I think that it's so important to just touch base with the community that you want to represent, and think to yourself, as I just said, what is the intention? What is the message here? Why do I want to do this? And I think that's kind of the thought in my head that I had as I was writing really every element of Glasgow Boys. But thankfully, so much of it came from personal experience, such as the working class element. I've had so many working class readers that I can connect to on that level. And especially, about the NHS, as a previous NHS worker who's also disabled and really relies on the NHS. And these aren't, marginalised communities, but I do think that they're so specific that if you did want to write about them, I would really recommend to anyone, if you've not experienced, working alongside people or even chatted to people, or if you can't get a reader that's a friend, like, you can always hire people. I think there's a great database called Write Up. And you can kind of type in the experience or the identity that you want to get a sensitivity reader for, and you can kind of scroll through like people's kind of, I don't know if you call them CVs, but you can definitely hire people on there. It's a paid job, and I think it's so brilliant that people are able to kind of give their insight and their opinion and their voice into their own representation in fiction.
Yeah, and I also just think it just helps like the writer and the writing as well, because often people relate to things that just reflect real life, and the closer you can reflect real life, it often just makes for like richer work and stuff as well. I want to sort of talking about the sort of working class thing and your sort of whole background. I know I was asking you earlier about getting the agent and things, but once you sort of get the agent and you want to sort of get Glasgow Boys out there, there's obviously people might not know this if they're not in the world of the sort of like writing and things, but like there's quite a big process, isn't there? To like, you don't just sort of get to publish the manuscript as is. Like, you must have had to go through quite a lot of edits and things. Like, how does that process all work? It'd be great to sort of find a bit more about that.
Yeah, 100%. That's such a good point. I feel as though when I got my agent, so my agent is called Rachel Petty, and she had left Macmillan's Children's Books as editorial director and become an agent. I think because she wasn't seeing, the work that she wanted. She was kind of putting forward books, but they weren't getting through kind of acquisitions, which is the kind of sales and marketing team. So yeah, she became an agent, and I was so lucky to query her 3 months out of becoming an agent. So she had really no clients, no commitments, and she was really actively acquiring. She was hunting for people, and I think that's just such a goldmine that you could get once in a lifetime, really. And I do think, I could have kept trying to get an agent, and maybe if it hadn't been Rachel, it would have been someone else. But I do think that finding people who are really new agents, and anyone who is trying to get an agent or querying, I would really massively recommend a query tracker or query manager. I paid for the full year subscription. It was £20, and it gives you a list of agents who have just joined. It also gives you insight into their reply rate. This is all user fed data, so people who are members of Query Tracker and Query Manager will input the data. But I think it's so useful to be able to see an agent hasn't replied to me for 3 months, but they've replied to this specific genre, like the next day. It's obviously what they're looking for. And you can find so many useful insights in it. But yeah, as you said, once you get your agent, and I feel like when Rachel took me on as her client, it was probably the biggest, celebration I had in the entire process, because everything else, was so uncertain. And, once you get your agent, I think you do have this little naive idea that that is it and that you've made it. And so you are kind of rudely awoken and you realise, there is still another step, and that is to attach a publisher to the work. So me and my agent Rachel edited it very lightly for a month or so. It was really light process, and she said to me, that is because I don't want to touch it too much in case a publisher wants to really, go into deep edits. And I'm really glad she did that, because I did go into really deep edits with Faber, and I think that the edits only made it better. I'm so glad that we did the edits, but obviously it took about 4 months of submissions. We had 20 rejections from publishers, which were all very lovely, some of the kindest rejections I've ever had in my life. Paragraphs, letters, saying why they couldn't take it on. And it's so strange, because you read the start of it and you think, oh, this is an acceptance, and nope. But that just shows you're so close. When you start getting those level of rejections, you really are close. Even though it's kind of gutting, it's still motivating in a strange way. And then I got the call about 4 months in. Rachel said, Alice, my editor, is obsessed with it. She loves it. But we hadn't taken it to acquisitions yet. So I thought, okay, no worries, but let me know when we have a little bit more confirmation. And then it was the same day at 4 p.m, yeah, we're taking it. So it was really quick. Even though it also was really long at the same time. And then we edited Glasgow Boys for about 8 months with my editor Alice and my other editor Amma. So they're incredible, brilliant geniuses. And we did 8 rounds of edits on Glasgow Boys. So those were developmental edits. We also worked with a freelance editor who read it at a very final stage. And I think that, as I said, those edits only improved Glasgow Boys. We ended up cutting about 15,000 words of just fluff and filler and stuff that could be edited and cut down. I mean, I would say to any writer, but especially in the children's space, the shorter the better. Less is more. Really try and be as pacey and punchy as you can. And I think that Glasgow Boys needed that edit a lot. And yeah, we also did a lot of structural developmental work, and I mean, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but the book has flashbacks involved. So originally the flashbacks were a sort of segment of the novel. Sort of partway through the novel, we would see all of the flashbacks, whereas my editors had the brilliant idea to like kind of piece and put the flashbacks and sprinkled throughout the book so that they sort of worked the way that kind of memory does. And whenever Banjo and Finley were thinking about each other, we would get a kind of corresponding flashback, which I think was really kind of powerful and emotional. So yeah, it was a long process.
Do you find the editing quite hard? Because I often find when I'm script editing with writers, you're always mindful. You're like, especially when you're working on a script for a couple of years and you're like constantly going back, you're like, got a few more notes, and because you want it to be great, and it's hard sometimes when you can see a writer go, oh my God, I've got to do more. Like, was it hard, or did you quite enjoy like that process?
I think it was the novelty that I enjoyed at first, and then I did get fatigued. And I think that it's good to know, I think, your limits as a writer. So, we're working on my next project. I can't really say anything more about it, but I've hit kind of a similar moment that I did with Glasgow Boys, and it's really made me think, oh right, like I do actually have a boundary that I do get quite fatigued at a certain point, or I slightly understand now my own method of working. I think that creatively, I mean, all authors and all creatives probably feel this, but you're always kind of enjoying the creation stage, the creation period, like the first draft. But honing something is really the toughest part of the process. And I think there is a certain level you get within the honing process that you think, I'm really creatively fatigued and I've run dry and I really want to move on to something else. And I think when I get to that stage that I want to move on to something else, like to put it cheesily, like my heart has kind of like shifted and like I'm no longer like in this, I'm no longer like addicted to it, obsessed with it. I think that is, a useful kind of what would you say, benchmark for me. And then I will probably just start drafting something else, even if it's just for fun, even if it's just a short story, to just keep the creative well, like flowing or whatever you'd say. And then I think that, as I said, breaks are so important. As I said as well, the novelty aspect for me when I was getting edits meant that if Alice gave me a deadline of 2 weeks, I'd think I want to do it in a week. Like I would just think I want to overachieve. I want to really prove myself. And now I think, no, I've been given those 2 weeks because it's a 2-week job.
And the sort of title of the book came from that process as well. It was called something else, wasn't it?
Yes. Glasgow Boys had many names. So my name, and again, this was a placeholder. I said this to Rachel, but it was called Small Ties. It's a very bad title. It really is not evocative of anything, but I was having such a struggle naming Glasgow Boys anything. And then me and my agent, when we went on submission to publishing houses, we called it The Impossible Lightness of Touch, which was very kind of lyrical, very John Green. I think it kind of evoked that sense of YA. And me and Rachel, when we were pitching Glasgow Boys, we were pitching it like purely to children's and YA editors, purely to that market. And then when Faber took it on, they thought, we want to do something different. We want this to be a crossover into adult audiences, and we think that we need like a really punchy title. So we went back and forth with a few different titles, and then I kind of threw out, okay, Glasgow Boys, because we were thinking something about boys. I think we were thinking like two boys, or just a Faber-esque kind of literary title. And I said, okay, Glasgow Boys, and they were like, we love this. And I didn't actually expect them to like it at all. And I remember my editor said, okay, like I'll chat to the sales and marketing team, but because of the kind of Glaswegian aspect, they might want to like open it up and not make it like so, I guess, Scottish centric. But then no, marketing and sales absolutely loved it. They were like, this is it. So it worked out.
Yeah, and it's such a beautiful cover on the book as well. I feel like, I don't know if my camera's even picking it up well enough. It's a bit, the lighting in my setup today is not great, but it is such a lovely cover as well of Banjo sort of looking out over Glasgow, which is really, really nice. Like, it stands out in the bookshop. Whenever I'm also, maybe because I'm a fan of the book, but I feel like whenever I'm in like a shop, I'm like, oh, there's Glasgow. Like, sort of just presents itself quite well.
Thank you. Yeah, we managed to get like a high-rise flat set in Glasgow from like a kind of Scottish photographer. And then we worked with Johnny Pelham, who is an incredible graphic designer. And I think he was actually shortlisted for an award for that cover, which, yeah, I'm like weirdly proud of. It's not even my work, but it's connected to me. So yeah, I absolutely adore that cover. I think he did such a brilliant job in capturing, as you'd said, like Banjo's kind of self-isolation. He's kind of looking across Glasgow, but he's really like struck off and disconnected as well. I think it was so clever.
Yeah, he's such a nice character as well, Banjo. You really like want just things to work out for him.
Yeah,
Um,
everyone says that.
and the running stuff as well is quite nice because I feel like running's so like in at the moment. I get like if that's even a word. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like everyone's into running stuff now, so
Yeah, I
it kind
feel
of
after
all
the
feels quite nice.
pandemic. Yeah, I feel after the pandemic, like I got into running just really randomly, and I'm asthmatic, chronically disabled. I was not good at running, but I feel like it was a real good like stress reliever for me. So it was something that I naturally thought Banjo would just be obsessed with because it's just such a easy way to like expel pent up energy. And I do just think it's his little kind of therapy. We all have, things that kind of soothe us and help us. And for Banjo, it definitely felt like it was very much connected to him as a person. And then yeah, I do think my friend who read it, she's an artist. She mentioned the fact that Banjo always finds himself in the art classrooms, and she's like, I feel like he's got an artistic bone in his body, which I just hadn't connected. But I do think that Banjo likes being around, yeah, just things that give him comfort. So I think that would be like the quietness of an art classroom.
Yeah, no, it's really nice when people start like making I mean, as you know from your fan fiction stuff, but when people start like coming up with their interpretation of
Yeah,
characters
I
in the
love
world
it
you've created.
for sure.
Um, talking as well. I mean, something I wanted to kind of touch on because you had this book published like you're like in what you're like 26 or something. You would have had this book published like that's such a young age to get like a book out, which is an incredible achievement. And I think you're the youngest ever winner of the Carnegie Award as well. Just to quickly touch on, but like. How did you sort of feel when like the book was published? Like a lot of people I speak to on this podcast suffer from things like imposter syndrome and stuff. Did you have a sense of like what the hell is going on, or did it sort of feel like that this just like is meant to be?
Yeah, it's like probably a mix, honestly. And I do think that because I am quite is the word aspirational? I can't think. Ambitious, that's the word I'm trying to think of. I am quite ambitious. As I'd said, I knew about the Carnegie Award, I knew of its existence even before I had published a novel. And as I'd said to you before as well, I had a Word document of all my like literary submissions. I submitted to short story competitions. I submitted to emerging writers awards, scholarship schemes. I got rejected from everything. I didn't get an acceptance ever. But I think it was just a little bit of that, as you'd said, self delusion of just, I'm just going to keep going. I like it, and I think it did take me a long time to develop that sense of belief, I guess, in my own work. But I think that once I did develop it, it's been quite unshakable. I do really, really cling to the idea that no, like my personal taste and the passion and the joy that I have in my work is the most important thing to me. I mean, I suppose that loads of authors talk about this, but truly, I do mean it. Like seeking external validation is such a temporary kind of reprieve from any kind of, insecurity or self-esteem. It really does have to come from you, because when it comes from you, it can't be taken away. If that is, yeah, I feel like I'm getting so hippy dippy, but
No, it's
I
so
think
true. It's so true. Yeah.
I think that is why when Glasgow Boys, it was up for awards, because you're nominated, then longlisted, then shortlisted, then you either win or you don't. And Glasgow Boys got up to the shortlisting of everything that it was nominated for, which was so incredible. But at every stage, like at longlisting, I was like, okay, I'm really gunning to be shortlisted now. Okay, like, and the first thing that we heard back from in terms of the award season that Glasgow Boys had. So Glasgow Boys was shortlisted for the Waterstones Children's Book Prize, and I knew all the authors on the shortlist. I think that they are incredible, and the winner, Nate, is genuinely one of my good friends now. But I do still remember feeling really gutted when I didn't win. And I don't know, like I'm kind of the opposite of having imposter syndrome. I'm so ambitious. I just, crazily do want to win anything that I'm up for. I do really strongly, I guess, just strive to achieve things that I put my mind to. And I don't know where that really comes from. I wish I could give it to other people, especially when I like go into schools and talk to kids, and I feel, the kind of insecurity that I felt when I was younger. But I feel like, I don't know, maybe my frontal lobe developed or something. It just clicked into place, and I just kind of thought, actually, the only thing that matters is whether or not I like my work and believe in it. And there's been some things that I've written that I think are bad or just not worth pursuing. You know, some things I've even finished and edited and then thought, no, this is actually like a bit stuck in the mud. I'm really struggling to push forward with this. Okay, I'm going to move on. That's fine. And then like Glasgow Boys, you know, it kind of just leapt out of me. It was such a catharsis, but also it was something that I was so willing to edit and to make as perfect as possible. And the same with my other works. I mean, after Glasgow Boys, I wrote a novel that I then shelved. And then I wrote another one that I basically have adapted now into my hopefully next book. But throughout that process, the only kind of thing that mattered to me was my own personal opinion on the work. I have really high standards, I think, for myself. And I think that is what keeps me motivated. You know, have I reached my own standard? Because, yeah, as I say, like seeking external validation from, I mean, even at uni, I would be desperate to be like top of the class. And I just don't think it was massively healthy for me. I just think that it's not something that gave me a lot of joy. Even the times I was top of the class, it didn't really come with any like passion, the way that when it comes from me and I'm loving the work, I get such a different experience, you know. It just is so much more joyful. So then, yeah, when I kind of chuck it out into the world to be received, it really doesn't matter what people think.
I mean, it's a really healthy place to be in, though, and I can relate to that a lot. I mean, it's so interesting. It's such a good lesson to learn. I think sometimes, to be perfectly honest, I still maybe put too much value on that external thing. And I think doing something like a podcast where you put it out every week and there's so much numbers involved in it, because you're constantly like, how many people have listened or engaged this episode, and it can fluctuate a lot. And sometimes an episode could do really well and you're like, oh my God, that's great. And then if it doesn't, it's like, it's trying to separate, again, it's that identity thing we talked about at the start, like trying to separate that from your work as well, and going like, I know that was a great interview, but maybe not that many people, it's just been, you know, not enough people have seen it on social media or whatever it might be, trying to separate that. And sometimes you're just like, you know, it doesn't ultimately matter as well, but it's really hard.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I think with fan fiction, weirdly, there is that kind of numbers game, because sometimes one of your fan fictions will just explode, and then another time you'll put a lot of work and energy into something and honestly prefer it sometimes to the one that exploded, and then you won't get the same reception. I think that has massively taught me it really only matters how much energy, you know, and how much passion I have for the kind of project. As I said, if I care about the reception, that's the only thing that will drive me. So, I mean, it was a long process, like throughout university, as I said. And, you know, once we published Glasgow Boys, I remember it was out sort of for review, but it wasn't published yet. So it was out for review in December 2023, and it was publishing May 2024. And throughout that period, I would genuinely refresh Goodreads 5 times a day at least. I would care so much. But now, funny enough, when I get like a 1-star, 2-star, I have this experience of like, oh, I'm interested to know why they really, really disliked it, it seems. And then sometimes I'll read the 1-star, 2-star, and if I think, ugh, like, I don't really agree with any of this, that's also useful to me, because I know that there was nothing I could have done to make them like it more. And then conversely, if I read the 1-star, 2-star and think, oh, okay, they have some points, that was also useful to me, because I can then take that into my next work. So yeah, I mean, I think I have just really honed and mastered, I guess, my thick skin.
That's very inspiring. I need to learn some more of that, to be honest. It was brilliant. It was brilliant, though. I appreciate you sort of being honest about that as well. I want to quickly touch on the sort of reality of being an author as well. So, only if you're happy to share, but you still work a sort of day job around your like being an author, because a lot of people listen to this will think Margaret's won a Carnegie Award, she's had this really successful book, but you are still like working a day job, which I think is so common on this podcast. The amount of amazing people I interview, that even I sometimes, as an interviewer, I'm quite surprised when they're like, oh yeah, I'm still doing this other job on the side. You're like, oh my God, you've had like a really successful album, whatever it might be. I think that's really important for people to hear, actually. I think it makes people feel a lot better about what they're up to.
Yeah. I want to be, as you said, like really truthful and transparent, and not bleak, and not say that, you know, you could never make it as a full-time author. But for me, it's just not really something that I envision would make me happy. I think I chatted to you a wee bit, but the idea of being freelance and really relying on the wage. I mean, for those that don't know, and I think they would be quite surprised how publishing works, You get like a lump sum advance, and that is really all the money that you'll generally see from a novel. But that advance is split into installments. So you'll get one installment when you sign a contract for a book deal, and then one installment when the book publishes, or 18 months after you've signed it, because sometimes a book can publish 2 years, 3 years, depending on the editing schedule, the marketing, whatever. And then you'll get a final installment the year after. So even like the kind of advances that you get in publishing, and you might hear, someone got a 6-figure advance. I definitely didn't, but even that advance is split into at least 2 or 3 years. So after taxes, it genuinely doesn't even make a full-time wage. You would have to have maybe multiple book deals plus royalties coming in from books previously published. That is why a lot of the full-time authors you'll see are very well established. They maybe have 5 books under their belt. You won't often see a debut author being a full-time author. I mean, it's possible, but I really don't think that, especially if you're working class, it's achievable. So for me, something potentially in the future, but very much not right now, because I just couldn't rely on the money that you get from just one book one book deal. But I also feel like I quite like the balance of working, and I don't want to be kind of, what would you say, dismissive to those that are full-time authors and they really love being a full-time author, or they have like a great schedule and it really works for them. But I just think that it wouldn't work for me. Like, honestly, I think that the way that I write is as a hobby, or as something that is as enjoyable as like tuning into your favorite TV show. I really love writing, and I don't know if I would really at this stage want to make it work, because I feel like if I'm financially reliant on it, it would come with a lot more pressure than it does just, I get to open up a document and just pour my brain out and just have fun with it.
Yeah, I relate to you a lot on this sort of thing of, like, often a lot of people that work in TV like me are very much comfortable being freelancers, and I've recently become a freelancer and I'm finding it quite tricky, and like I don't know, it's a weird pressure to it. So even doing this podcast, like if I was just doing this, I'd find that quite stressful, because then it's like you're sort of having to do this thing you love as like independent on it for money and things as well. And that can come up with some pressures. There's sort of two camps of people. I feel like some people love that pressure, but some people don't, and I think it's completely fine. I think it's about knowing yourself, actually, and what you can sort of tolerate in things. I've only got a few more questions for you, Margaret, but I wanted to ask you about, you kind of touched on it earlier as well, feeling like not having that imposter syndrome, but how do you sort of find the creative industries in general, especially like in Scotland and sort of in the circles you're now sort of in as a sort of published author? Like, do you feel quite comfortable in that world? Because it's quite a middle class sector, I think. Like, I think coming from a working class background, in my experience anyway, sometimes I'll be in rooms and I'm like, oh, this is a bit, I don't quite know if I belong fully in this place.
Yeah, I think that is, you've hit the nail on the head, really. And it's also a reason why I don't want to be a full-time author, is because it becomes much more about being in the publishing industry, in the publishing space. I would probably have to move to London if I wanted to be a full-time author, just to get the opportunities and the gigs and do the festivals and everything that comes with being an author. I mean, there is an incredible literary scene across Scotland. There's the I Write Festival. There is Edinburgh Book Festival, literally the biggest international book festival in the world. But these only happen like once a year. And to make it a full-time job, I do think it is about knowing people, getting connections, and therefore getting the opportunities. And I totally agree with you in that I have been in multiple rooms, and I have been the only working class person. I sometimes feel when I say, one of my major inspirations of being an author is my working class background, I get a little bit of a look, like I don't know how to explain it. I just get like a I'm surprised by that, and I can tell without even words that person, has kind of no insight into what that means, because I think that, as you'd mentioned, the opinion, I think, of being working class is very bleak and downtrodden and things, very Charles Dickens-esque. And I really think that the reality is so much more nuanced, and really being working class is such an integral part of my identity, and it has been such an incredible source of community and inspiration for me. We have so much I guess kinship with each other. We have so much understanding. I feel like Yeah, there's just such a wealth of experiences in being working class that I really felt quite passionate about, like putting on the page. And I mean, I'd said this in schools and stuff like that, but for me, with Banjo and Finley, even the idea wasn't to take them through like a rags to riches. Oh, they will end up okay because they get some kind of inheritance at the end. Like, I really wanted it to be they start working class and they stay working class, and that is, never questioned. It's never a source of misery for them. It is just their reality. It's just their life. And it's the same with me. I will always be working class, and I'm very proud of that.
No, it's really nice and very true about the book. I hadn't ever thought about that when I was reading it, but yeah, no, that's true. It doesn't really get mentioned. I think it just, again, like I like when people write like that, and it's just sort of normal. It's not made into it's the story's about Finlay and Banjo. It's not about Finlay and Banjo who are working class. Do you know what I mean? It's just sort of, yeah, that's a nice aspect of it. I've got a few quick fire questions for you, Margaret. As we wrap up, the first one is, who is the sort of biggest inspiration on your writing, like other authors and things?
I really love Nathaniel Lasore. He's also a friend, but I do find him majorly inspiring. I love Jandy Nelson. She's an American author, but I think that her work in terms of voice, she just really makes you feel like you are in a teenager's head. It's so impressive. Brian Conahan, fellow Scot, I think his work, I mean, we were up for the Carnegie together, and his novel Treacle Town is set in Coatbridge, and it's written in sort of Coatbridge Scots dialect, and I just loved seeing that on the page. And I think that Brian Conahan is a major inspiration as someone who has been writing in Scots for a very long time and really kind of putting us on the page.
No, for sure. The sort of other part of that is, like, has there been a book you've read recently that stands out?
Okay, I'm gonna get up my Goodreads. I feel like I was doing this before we joined this interview because I read this question. 24 Seconds From Now by Jason Reynolds is a brilliant novel. It's up for the Carnegie this year. And it is about a boy called Neon who is having his first time with his girlfriend, and it sort of talks about consent and all the sort of issues around kind of your first time and the kind of stigma and the kind of way in which people talk about sex and things like that when they're teenagers. I thought that was so authentic and really fresh as a kind of topic to discuss. I loved 6 Weeks by Matt Goodfellow. It's an in-verse novel, so it's a kind of prose poem. It's about a young boy who has lost his mum, and it's a sort of 6 weeks in between kind of the summer between school, and he is really kind of figuring things out. So yeah, and then actually I loved Love on Sight by Asa Jensen. It's a sort of novel about two teenagers, and one is kind of Somali Muslim and the other is Jamaican Christian, and it's a sort of love story about the kind of intercultural, interfaith relationship and the sort of issues that arise from that. So yeah, those would be my recommends.
Great, thanks for some recommendations as well. Do you have like a favourite Scottish book of all time or anything?
Gosh, I recently loved, it's maybe not my favourite book of all time, but the one that's coming to mind is Only Here, Only Now by Tom
Oh, it's
Newlands.
great. Yeah, I read that recently as well. It's nice to see
Yeah.
Fife on a
Oh my
book as well.
gosh, yeah, I loved it. And Tom is just such a lovely guy. But yeah, I'm so delighted that won Scottish Book of the Year. I really feel like we are hopefully on the come up with, Scottish fiction.
For sure. Last question for you, which we ask every guest that comes on, Margaret. But what's your sort of closing advice to anyone that wants to become an author or become a writer?
I feel like I've majorly given it throughout the podcast, but really I would say, be a little bit self-delusional about your own work. Really just cling to, I think the reason why you started, if it was a creative project, say a script, or say it was a novel, just really cling to the reason why I started it in the first place. Because as I'd mentioned, external validation unfortunately runs out. I speak from experience, and even when you do obtain it, it can sometimes not feel the way that you expected it to. I think it's more a relief, but then it's like a dopamine hit. You just keep kind of wanting it again. Whereas if it comes from you, it's like genuinely an endless well that will not run out. So please maintain your own self-belief. Call it whatever you want. Delusion. Like, we can all be a little delulu. And yeah, I think you'd mentioned as well the idea of tough love. I think that if you care about something, then, and if you're sensitive to the world around you, that's a good thing. I do not think that that should be criticised or that you should be told to kind of toughen up. I think that if you care about the work, that will shine through, and that is what will connect to other readers. If you don't care about it, then there's really no point pursuing it.
Thank you very much. No, I think that's a really lovely place to leave things on. Margaret, thank you so much. Just for everyone watching and listening, Glasgow Boys is available from all good bookshops. There's also an audiobook of it now and stuff as well. There's links to Glasgow Boys and Margaret's website and everything like that in the show notes below. Please subscribe to Just Get a Real Job. Please share it if you're enjoying the podcast. They're trying to grow and stuff at the moment, so appreciate all your support. Margaret, thank you so much for your time. It's been so nice. I've honestly not had enough offers on the podcast, and certainly not enough Scottish offers, so it's a pleasure to have you on and to chat to you about Glasgow Boys and all your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. No, it's been such fun. I've really enjoyed chatting.
Just get a real